Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi says the international community cannot walk away from its obligation to help resolve the Kashmir dispute. Addressing a seminar on the eve of Kashmir Solidarity Day in Islamabad, Alvi said the world should realize that India is a belligerent and irresponsible state which could endanger regional peace. In his address, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Kashmiris are facing a threat of extermination at the hands of Indian forces. In India, two more farmers from Punjab have died during protests on the Delhi borders. More than 100 growers have lost their lives during 2 months of demonstrations against the new farm laws. Meanwhile, Delhi police have filed 43 FIRs against the farmers over the Republic Day violence. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called on the international community to ensure Myanmar's military coup fails. In an interview, the UN chief termed the reversal of elections unacceptable. Meanwhile, Myanmar's military has ordered telecom companies to block Facebook services over opposition against the coup. Washington says it is disappointed by the top UN court's ruling that it can take up Iran's case to overturn US sanctions. Criticizing Iran for casting the ruling as a victory, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said the court has issued a preliminary ruling, not a decision on the merits. Earlier, the International Court of Justice ruled it has jurisdiction to hear the Iran sanctions case. Over 1,700 people have died from COVID-19 in Mexico overnight, with the death toll crossing 161,000. In Pakistan, over 1,500 people tested positive and 31 died overnight as the death toll climbs to 11,833. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.26 million lives, infecting over 104.3 million people so far. And in cricket, Pakistan have scored 145 runs for the loss of 3 wickets as play comes to an end on the first day of the second test against South Africa. A total of 32 overs were lost due to rain after the home side elected to bat first on a flat surface. Babar Azam and Fawad Alam steered their side to recovery after the loss of early wickets. Pakistan are leading the 2-match series 1-0. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Pakistan, where the President Arif Alvi says the international community cannot walk away from its obligation to help resolve the Kashmir dispute. He was addressing a seminar on the eve of Kashmir Solidarity Day in Islamabad. In his speech, he said the world must realize that India is a belligerent and irresponsible state which could endanger regional peace. The president urged the international community to hold India accountable for its atrocities in occupied Kashmir. Earlier, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Kashmiris are facing the threat of extermination at the hands of Indian forces. He said the recent report by EU Disinfo Lab validates Pakistan's stance on India's malicious designs. Pakistan has called on international community to take notice of Indian conspiracies in Gilgit-Baltistan. At a media briefing in Islamabad, the activist from Gilgit-Baltistan said India wants to create a division in the region. Advocate Abbas says a particular group backed by India is active in anti-Pakistan activities in Gilgit-Baltistan. He said India also wants to divide Gilgit-Baltistan. Abbas said people of Gilgit-Baltistan will never allow Indian conspiracies to succeed. Mehdi Shah Rizvi's daughter Tayyiba Rizvi said anti-Pakistan elements tried to influence her father. Now moving to India, where 2 farmers from Punjab have died during protests on the Delhi borders. More than 100 crores have lost their lives during the 2 months of demonstrations against the new farm laws. Delhi police have filed 43 FIRs against the agitating farmers over the Republic Day violence. The police have also stopped a delegation of opposition leaders from visiting the protest site at Ghazipur. Meanwhile, the farmers' movement has escalated into a full-blown global war on social media. Meena Harris, lawyer and niece of U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee member Jim Costa have joined the voices supporting the farmers. YouTuber Lilesh Singh, poet Rupi Kaur, rapper Russ, UK MP Claudia Webb, and a host of others also sent out comments in solidarity. Now, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on the international community to ensure Myanmar's military coup fails.
In an interview, the UN chief termed the reversal of elections unacceptable and called for the restoration of constitutional order. Guterres expressed hope that Myanmar's military will understand that this is not the way to move forward. The UN Security Council is also discussing a possible condemnation statement. The US says it is disturbed by reports that ousted Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi was charged following the military's takeover. State Department spokesman Ned Price repeated a call for all detained in the coup to be immediately released. Earlier, police raided San Suu Kyi's party offices and filed charges against her. She has been remanded in custody until 15 February. The charges include breaching import and export laws and possession of unlawful communication devices. Meanwhile, the army has ordered telecom companies to block Facebook services over opposition against the coup. This comes as demonstrators gathered in Myanmar's second most populous city of Mandalay.
Now, the United States says no decision has been made on its troops' levels in Afghanistan. Earlier, a bipartisan State Department report to Congress urged the Biden administration to slow the withdrawal.
The report said Washington should not abandon the Afghan peace process, but abandon the May 1 exit deadline. A Congress-appointed panel recommended that the number of forces should be reduced only if security conditions improve. It added, withdrawing all U.S. troops could lead to civil war, destabilize the region, and revive the ISIS threat. Meanwhile, a top EU official said half the Afghans need humanitarian aid, but rising violence is preventing deliveries. European Commissioner for Crisis Management, Yanis Lenarčič, also called for an immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire. Lenarčič visited Kabul to announce the EU will provide €32 million for humanitarian projects in 2021.
In war-torn Afghanistan, half of the population is in dire need of basic humanitarian aid, but the increasing violence prevents deliveries. The European Union Commissioner for Crisis Management reiterates call for a ceasefire between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Let's have more in this report.
The Afghan government and the Taliban have been negotiating a political settlement in Afghanistan. But the increasing violence in the country has dashed hopes that the US-brokered peace process in Doha would reduce the conflict. Meanwhile, European Commissioner for Crisis Management, Yanis Lenarčič, called for an immediate, unconditional and comprehensive ceasefire, especially for smooth delivery of the humanitarian aid. He has visited Kabul to announce the EU will provide €32 million for humanitarian projects in 2021.
There are challenges with regard to the access for humanitarian work and supplies. But the international humanitarian community is working very hard on this, on improved access. It is important for all in Afghanistan, the government as well as Taliban and others, to understand that allowing for full and unimpeded humanitarian access is their obligation under international humanitarian law.
This year, even during the winter months, fighting has taken place around the country. Yanis Lenarchard said that the situation of internal displaced people in Afghanistan is a matter of urgency. There has to be effective action to address their needs. He called on the government and Taliban for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, allowing full and unimpeded humanitarian access.
We very much hope and call for immediate, unconditional and comprehensive ceasefire in Afghanistan now, because that would increase the chances for a success of the ongoing peace process. Continued violence diminishes, on the other hand, the chances for success because it obviously hardens the positions of the two sides. That's why we call for immediate ceasefire.
EU Commissioner says that €32 million funds are separate from the $12 billion over the next 4 years that foreign donors, including the EU, have pledged in November.
Now moving on, Washington says it is disappointed by the United Nations court ruling that it can take up Iran's case to overturn United States sanctions. Earlier, the International Court of Justice ruled it has the jurisdiction to hear the Iran sanctions case. Criticizing Iran for calling the ruling as a victory, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said the court has issued a preliminary ruling, not a decision on merit. Price said the ICJ did not accept Washington's well-founded legal argument that the case is outside the court's jurisdiction. He added the United States remains clear about the dangers posed by Iran's malign activities. Earlier, International Court of Justice President Abdul Qavi Ahmad Yusuf rejected U.S. obligations, but it said a ruling could take months or even years. Now, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators has introduced a draft legislation to the U.S. Congress. They are proposing sanctions against Russia over the case of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. The group of 4 Democrats and 2 Republican senators reintroduced the Holding Russia Accountable for Malign Activities Act of 2021. The bill seeks to impose targeted sanctions against Russian officials complicit in Navalny's poisoning and imprisonment. The proposed legislation calls for an investigation if the Kremlin violated U.S. laws prohibiting the use of chemical and biological weapons. It also demands a report on the assassination of Russian opposition politician Boris Nemtsov. Moving on now, Turkey says it has neutralized 5 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Syria near its southern border. It says the militants attempted to infiltrate the area under its anti-terrorism operations Peace Spring and Euphrates Shield. The National Defense Ministry said the militants were gunned down after they opened fire at the Turkish troops. Ankara holds the Kurdistan Workers' Party responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Moving on now, Syria says its defense systems have intercepted Israeli missiles in the southern region. The Israeli military has declined to comment. Syrian state media said the Israeli aggression targeted Quneitra Governorate. It reported no casualties but only limited material damage. Israeli officials previously said their forces struck hundreds of Iranian targets in Syria. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, over 1,700 people have died from COVID-19 in Mexico overnight, with the death toll crossing 161,000. Globally, the virus has claimed over 2.26 million lives, infecting over 104.3 million people so far. More about the pandemic in this report.
The planet's fight against the new coronavirus is finally gaining momentum as studies show growing public confidence in vaccines, and with over 108 million doses administered already, the number of vaccinated people has exceeded the global infections tally. The UN's vaccine initiative COVAX has issued the list of countries scheduled to get their share from the initial 337 million doses. However, while mass immunizations rev up, the virus continues to claim tens of thousands across the globe, with the US being hit the hardest. The number of fatalities in the US has crossed 450,000, with the average daily deaths of 3,000. US Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci says the war against the pandemic is just beginning.
We have to be concerned about the mutants. Viruses will not mutate well if you don't give them the opportunity to replicate in a very large way. Namely, if you have an open playing field for the virus, they will replicate and they will mutate.
Mutant variants first found in South Africa and Brazil have now been detected in Turkey as well. The UK has initiated the first ever trials to assess the immune responses if doses of Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines are combined in a two-shot schedule. If proved viable, the mixing could improve vaccine distribution. Meanwhile, though Britain witnesses a slowdown in the spread of the disease, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned the country cannot afford to let its guard down just as yet.
And though today there are some signs of hope, the numbers of COVID patients in hospital are beginning to fall for the first time since the onset of this new wave, the level of infection is still alarmingly high.
South Korean Prime Minister has ordered a revamp of social distancing guidelines. The country's 5-tier distancing system has faced a public backlash for imposing unfair restrictions and curfews on specific businesses. China has reported 30 new COVID-19 cases, slightly up from a day earlier, but still well below the peaks seen last month.
Now, US President Joe Biden and Senate Democrats have agreed to move swiftly to get the $1,400 stimulus checks to most Americans. White House spokesperson Jen Psaki made these remarks during a news briefing.
During the conversation, the President and Democratic leaders also agreed to continue working to find areas of bipartisan agreement in an effort to integrate ideas and make the process as bipartisan as possible.
Now, Pakistan is set to receive more than 17 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine in February under the UN-led COVAX initiative. COVAX is co-led by the WHO, the Gavi Vaccine Alliance and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Islamabad has already launched its nationwide immunization campaign after being gifted 500,000 doses by China earlier this week. Meanwhile, the virus has claimed 31 more lives and infected over 1,500 people overnight. This has pushed Pakistan's death toll to 11,833. The country has reported more than 550,000 cases so far, out of which almost 506,000 people have recovered. The Health Ministry says there are nearly 34,000 active cases in the country. Also in Pakistan, security forces have killed 4 terrorists in an anti-terrorism operation in northern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province's North Waziristan district. In a statement, the military's media wing said 2 soldiers were martyred and 4 wounded in the exchange of fire. It said the operation was conducted after forces observed the presence of terrorists in a compound in the Mir Ali area. The Inter-Services Public Relations said the troops faced heavy fire from terrorists the moment they cordoned off the area. It said the terrorists were involved in attacks on security forces. Now, South Korea has pledged to boost ties with the United States. The country's presidential office says President Moon Jae-in spoke to his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden in a phone call. Moon's office said the 2 leaders reaffirmed their commitment to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. It said the U.S. president praised the efforts of South Korea to resolve the inter-Korean conflict. Moon welcomed what he called America's return amid mounting global challenges. Meanwhile, the White House said Biden stressed his commitment to strengthening bilateral alliance and agreed to coordinate closely on North Korea. Meanwhile, Canada has named the far-right Proud Boys on its terror list, saying they pose an active security threat. The move comes after last month's attack on the U.S. Capitol that left 5 people dead. At a news conference, Public Safety Minister Bill Blair said the domestic intelligence was increasingly worried about the group. Blair said the concerning escalation of violence backed by activity and planning triggered the response. He added Canada will not tolerate ideological, religious or politically motivated acts of violence.
That there has been a serious and concerning escalation of violent, not just rhetoric, but activity and planning. And that's why we have responded as we have today. This update hopefully sends a strong message that Canada will not tolerate ideological, religious, or politically motivated acts of violence.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Justice Department has charged a top member of group's Seattle chapter over alleged role in the Capitol riots. Now moving on, the EU has rejected a UK demand to extend a grace period for checks on goods going from Britain to Northern Ireland. The bloc says the post-Brexit trade treaty gives London enough tools to solve the problems. British Minister Michael Gove and European Commission Vice President Maroš Šefčovič discussed the issue over a video call. In an interview after the call, Šefčovič said that under the post-Brexit trade deal, it was for the Britain to resolve the problem. However, he agreed to work intensively with the UK to resolve difficulties impeding the deliveries of goods. Meanwhile, in a statement, Gove said he and Šefčovič would meet in London next week. Now, the United Nations has warned of the worsening humanitarian situation in Ethiopia's northern region. United Nations Aid Chief Mark Lowcock said this while addressing the Security Council virtually. Lowcock said further conflict in the country's Tigray region could trigger broader destabilization. He noted that the government controls between 60 to 80% of Tigray, leaving the rest for ethnic Amhara and Eritrean forces to operate in. Lowcock said thousands of people in Tigray still have not received help as the UN does not have unimpeded access. He said there were troubling accusations of sexual and gender-based violence in the war-torn region. The aid chief added the humanitarian situation will deteriorate if protection and aid were not quickly increased. Now, SpaceX has successfully launched another set of Starlink satellites in the first of back-to-back Falcon 9 launches scheduled from Cape Canaveral. The rocket lifted off from Space Launch Complex 40 at the Space Force Station. Its payload of 60 broadband satellites separated from the rocket's upper stage 65 minutes later. The satellites can beam signals for high-speed internet service from space to paying customers around the globe. Another Falcon 9 rocket carrying a new batch of Starlink satellites will blast off from the Space Coast tomorrow. German startup Wingcopter has joined the race to offer COVID-19 vaccine distribution by air. The company is relying on its experience in remote areas like the South Pacific Ocean nation of Vanuatu. Details in this report.
The imminent arrival of COVID-19 vaccines has renewed hope that the beginning of the global recovery could be right around the corner. With the first shipments already mobilized in December 2020, the logistics sector is geared up to meet the increased demands for medical resources. Drone technology startup Wingcopter has secured fresh funding to strengthen its position and is seeking to get shots into the arms of people in hard-to-reach places.
What's special about Wingcopter is that it flies extremely fast. We set the world record with a maximum speed of 240 kilometers per hour. It can fly very far, more than 100 kilometers, with one battery charge.
The company, based in Weerstad, south of Frankfurt, is working on several trial projects for countries in Africa and Southeast Asia. It aims to scale up operations to deliver vaccines to millions of people.
Together with UNICEF, we already delivered vaccines to various remote villages and shortened the waiting period from hours to minutes. At the time, there were vaccines for children. The knowledge from then we can now apply to the COVID-19 vaccine delivery, and we know exactly what to do to deliver these vaccines much more efficiently.
Wingcopter was founded 3 years ago, and according to the company, it has received a total of $22 million, among others from Silicon Valley-based Explorer Capital and the German state of Hesse Growth Fund Futuri.
Now, European stocks have inched higher as investors focus on earnings reports and developments on the coronavirus pandemic. London's FTSE 100 is leading the gains, adding over 0.5%. Frankfurt's DAX and the CAC 40 in Paris have also ascended around 0.5%. The pan-European stock 600 and Italy's FTSE MIB have edged up marginally as well. Earlier, most Asian bourses traded lower. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.